My family and I moved from Houston, Texas, 2.5 years ago to Colorado. This will actually be our first white Christmas. Not just in Colorado, it'll be the first white Christmas I've ever had in my entire life. So pretty pumped for that. Because in Houston, it just doesn't, oh yeah, you can clap for me or Houston or whatever you're clapping for, that's great. In Houston, it just doesn't snow. And as a matter of fact, when it does snow, it's like this cold, wet ice stuff that's not really snow. And yet, there, you get excited about it. Like if it's just barely sort of kind of like sleeting, you run outside and you spin in circles and like, woo, we got snow. And so when we moved from that to Colorado 2.5 years ago, I mean, that first winter when it started to snow, we would, not just my kids, like me and my wife, we would go outside and say, isn't this amazing? And I would have my tongue out and I'd be spinning, I'd be doing snow angels. We got what was considered not a recordable amount of snow. So like nothing. And we went to Paintbrush Park and we're going down the slide. And like other Coloradans were looking at us like, what is wrong with those crazy people? And then we'd say we're from Texas and say, okay, that makes sense. Because we thought it was just so magical and so amazing. And then 2.5 years later, with lots and lots of shoveling, it snows and it's not quite as magical as it used to be. Why? Because you can get used to it. Something that was breathtaking becomes commonplace. And I think the same thing can often happen with Christmas. That Christmas as a child is magical, it's wonderful, it's amazing, and you're bouncing off the walls. And then you hear that same story over and over and over and over again. And as an adult, it's easy for Christmas to become trite. And so my challenge for you this Christmas is, what if we look at it from a slightly different perspective and really open our hearts to what it is that God would want us to learn? You see, the Christmas story is not just to tell us who Jesus was. That's what we oftentimes think about it as. But also the Christmas story is to help us to understand who Jesus is currently. You see, Jesus wants to have a relationship with us. And so the Christmas story is not just about, from this story a long time ago, a tale that kind of feels like a fairy tale. No, it is an active and alive part of us understanding the character and the nature of who Jesus is. That person that wants to have a relationship with each and every one of us. Isaiah chapter 9 has probably the most famous prophecy about the Messiah. And he says this, "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." That phrase, Prince of Peace, you've heard it so many times if you're around church that it almost loses its meaning, but that word peace is an interesting word. Like think about it and really unpack it for a second in your own mind. What does peace mean to you? Take this Christmas, for example. If you were to imagine Christmas and say, this Christmas is gonna be perfectly peaceful, how would you define it? You'd probably say, well, it means there's not gonna be any fighting, no war. Maybe the Christmas miracle for you would be that your whole family gets together and you have a whole day at Christmas where, with all the cousins and all the random uncles and aunts, that group of people comes together and no one fights for an entire day. That'd be a bit of a miracle, wouldn't it? That'd be a peaceful Christmas. Or maybe for you, a peaceful Christmas is that for the entire day, all the food tastes the way that it's supposed to taste. Nothing gets burnt, nothing gets undercooked, but it's perfect. Maybe for you, a peaceful Christmas means that everybody gets the gift that they really wanted and it's just perfect. And then when they receive that gift, they're actually thankful for that gift and look at you and say, thank you so much for what I've received. And I'm not just gonna complain about the things that I didn't get. Maybe that's a peaceful Christmas for you. Maybe peaceful just means that it's beautiful, that the tree is perfect and the people are perfect and it's gonna snow. Well, it did snow, and so that's gonna be perfect. And so when we think of peace and we think of peaceful, oftentimes we think of almost kind of this fairy tale atmosphere. Everything is wonderful. And yet, Prince of Peace, the type of peace that the Bible talks about, is a radically different type of peace than that. In Hebrew, that word peace comes from the word shalom, and shalom means complete or whole. It means that it's not lacking anything. And so a great verse to explain what shalom means comes out of Job, and he both sets up the word and then explains the word. He says, you shall know that your tent is at peace, and then he explains this is how you know your tent is at peace. You shall inspect your fold, that's the flock, and miss nothing. It's kind of an odd understanding of the word peace. It's saying that if you have a flock of sheep or a flock of goats and that you inspect them and they're all there, then that flock is at peace. If you were to take some of that flock, take just a handful of the sheep and you remove it from the flock, they're outside the fence, outside the gate, then you would no longer have a complete, a whole, a shalom flock. And so Jesus says that he wants to be our Prince of Peace, to make us whole, make us complete. You see, so often at Christmas time, we focus on all the stuff of Christmas. I would say that we focus on the different pieces of Christmas. We get caught up in these pieces. But the question is, have I experienced the true peace of Christmas? Now, we live in a culture that trends toward fairy tale. It's a fairy tale tendency. And what that basically means is this, is that we have a desire to make things seem better than reality. Like probably your family, either on your way in or on your way out, will take a photo with one of the bunch of different amazing photo ops that we created for a church. But if your family is like my family, here's how that moment works, okay? So you get everybody together, and it works at Christmas because everybody's dressed all nice and looking good, and they comb their hair. And so you get everybody together, and then someone snaps like 17 photos, just bam, 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 bam. And then as soon as the photos are taken in my family, the phone goes to my wife, and my wife starts to do this. And she's just swiping through, and finally she'll find one. She says, okay, I think this is the best one. And what that means, what she's looking for when she's swiping through is what? The one where she looks the best. That's her definition of the family photo. Because then she'll hand it to me and say, hey, this one looks nice. And I'll look at it and I'll say, only one of my eyes is open and I look like I got punched in the face. Why would you choose this one? And she looks at it and she says, oh, I didn't even notice that. But that's the photo that we're gonna post. We're gonna post a photo that in order, like my wife looks good, and then my kids look good, and then dad, if he's in it, that's great. That's an extra bonus. And then that's the picture that we're gonna post of the family. No one's gonna take 17 pictures and then say, hey, this one looks awful, the lighting is bad, nobody's eyes are open, nobody's smiling. That's the one that we're gonna post. Because we like to put our absolute best in front of everybody. At Christmas season, we send out Christmas cards. And what do Christmas cards do? It's just a giant humble brag about how wonderful and how great and how awesome our family is. And little Johnny's doing awesome, and little Susie's doing amazing. And we are Ken and Barbie, and woo, perfect family. That's what we like to do at Christmas time. And we even do it with actual fairy tales. That sometimes if you take a famous fairy tale and you really unwind the different layers, that it's really not a happy story, but we turn it into a happy story. We pretend that it's a happy story. I'll give you an example. This is a famous fairy tale, and I'm gonna show two different characters that you don't know who they are, and I want you to try in your mind, imagine and guess who these two characters are. So one character goes on a quest to save a princess. This other character actually captured and detained the princess. This character he assisted a crazy father. Like a guy was crazy and he helps him out and he goes on a journey with him. And then this character actually imprisoned that same father. This character has a bunch of friends. Whole village loves him. This character had servants, which are like paid friends because he doesn't actually have friends. This character rallied the aid of others. The whole village gets behind him. This character, actually his selfishness cursed those that were the closest to him. Does anybody know what story this is? Beauty and the Beast. That's exactly right. This is Gaston and this is the Beast. Now, I'm not saying that Gaston's the hero, but here's what I know for certain. He is definitely not the hero. I mean, he's the villain. Like if the beast and Belle come to me after he's transformed from the giant dog guy into a person, if they come to me and say, we'd like to get married, and we want you to do our premarital counseling, I'd say, hey, that's great. Let's sit down. Tell me your story. And about halfway through the story, I'd be calling the cops. I'd be like, hey, Belle, you got Stockholm Syndrome. This is classic. But this guy kidnapped you and imprisoned you. You guys aren't getting married. That should not happen. Not at all. Last night, I was trying to explain this to my 9-year-old daughter. And my 9-year-old daughter was aghast. She was like, no, don't you understand? The beast loved Belle. And I said, no, don't you understand? He kidnapped her. Like, that's not a romantic story at all. He's the villain that we like to make it seem like he was a great dude, but he wasn't. He just wasn't. But it's a fairy tale because we make it seem happy and wonderful and perfect, even though there's some pretty big flaws in the story. The Christmas story, the nativity scene, we sometimes think is a fairy tale. We try and make it seem so happy and so wonderful and so great, and yet it really wasn't. Probably at your house or a family member's house, you've got a nativity set, and in that nativity set, you got baby Jesus, and you got Mary and Joseph, you got the wise men, you got the shepherds, you got some animals, there's probably an angel, there's probably a star, and we look at that nativity scene and we say, wow, wasn't that perfect? But for Mary and Joseph, if you just put your mind into their shoes, everything about the nativity story was not perfect. I mean, just imagine you're Mary and God tells you, hey, you're gonna have a son and he's gonna be the Messiah. Mary's probably thinking, whoa, this is gonna be easy. This is gonna be great. I can't mess this up. My life is gonna be easy after this. And then the very next thing that happens is that, well, you've got now a child outside of wedlock, which 2,000 years ago, culturally was a really taboo thing to happen. And so all of a sudden, the whole village starts gossiping about you. And all of a sudden, everybody starts whispering about you. Well, and then finally, you kind of get past that. It's about time to have the baby. And right when it's time to have the baby, government decides to have a census. And you know this part of the story. They have to travel 90 miles from Nazareth to Bethlehem. And probably if I'm Mary somewhere on that 90-mile trip, while I'm either walking or on a donkey, I'm praying to God. I'm saying, God, hey, help me out here. I mean, like, I've got your son that I'm carrying. Surely you knew that they were going to call this census. Couldn't this census have happened next year or maybe 6 months ago? Why does it have to happen when I'm about to have a baby? And then what happens next? They finally get there, and of course, you know that famous part. There's no room for them in the inn. We're not really sure where Jesus is born, but it's definitely some kind of a stable because he gets put in a manger, a horse trough. It could have been in a cave, it could have been in some spare room, but definitely not where if you are a mother about to have your firstborn child, and this firstborn child is going to be the most important baby ever born. That's not in your mind the ideal situation you were hoping for. If you've ever had a baby, you know there's that whole nesting season and that preparation season. And surely Mary walked through that, and yet all of those plans were for naught. Probably at some point when she's taking her baby and putting him in a manger, there's some doubt in the back of the mind of, well, what is going on, God? And then to make matters worse, what happens next is that part of the story that we just tend to avoid. But in Matthew chapter 3, he's really clear to make it a part of the story. That you have the wise men, that they show up. And when they show up, they go to Herod, who's the king over the nation, and they say, hey, Herod, we're looking for the new king, the Jewish king that was prophesied to rule over everybody. And Herod says, what? Probably not a good idea to tell the current king that there's going to be a new king that's going to overthrow you. And so what does Herod do? Herod decides that he's going to kill every baby in Bethlehem. And so all of a sudden now, after the baby just recently being born, they have to flee to Egypt. It's hundreds of miles from Bethlehem to Egypt. Most likely, they would have fled to Alexandria, Egypt, because there was a Jewish settlement there. And surely at some point on that road to Alexandria, they're looking at each other, they're saying, Why can't God just intervene? Why can't God stop this? Why can't God fix this? And then at some point, while they're there, I'm sure they heard the news that, well, Herod had killed every male child in Bethlehem. We know historically about the size that Bethlehem was. And so probably it was between 25 and 75 baby boys that Herod killed. There's got to be some amount of guilt that they have about these babies that were killed and they were trying to find your baby, but also this fear that you have that well, that could have been us. They were coming for us. Probably not what they expected when they got pregnant with the Messiah. So here's a big question on the story of Christmas, and that question is this: where is the peace of Christmas for Mary and Joseph? You see, falsely, sometimes when we think of peace, we think of happiness. We think of no problems and no issues, and everything is warm and fuzzy, and spirit sprinkles, yay. But that's not the peace that Jesus offers. You see, in our capital C church, in the Western culture, we have this counterfeit Christianity that we often teach. And counterfeit Christianity teaches this: it's the belief that Jesus comes into my life and fixes everything, and my life is perfect. And if we grow up in a church believing that, here's the problem, is that at some point in your life, you'll have challenges just like Mary and Joseph, the parents of Jesus, faced. That they went through turmoil and struggle and challenge and stress and anxiety. And if Mary and Joseph walked through that, then guess what? So will we. But if we think that will never happen, then we'll get to a place in life where life doesn't turn out the way we expected it to. It's not as happy, it's not as warm fuzzy, and we're looking somewhere to blame, and where do we naturally go to? We go to God. We say, God, it's your fault. You were supposed to make everything right and everything wonderful, but see, here's the challenge with that. That's not true Christianity. You see, Christianity says that Jesus has come to give us peace, but it is a different type of peace. Jesus steps into a broken world. Romans chapter 8 describes this broken world. It says, for the creation, talking about our whole earth, was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption. So pause for a second. Here's what it's saying. It's going all the way back to creation, that in creation, God creates man and woman to have a relationship with God. But in that relationship, God wants there to be love. And in order for there to be love, not just love from God to his creation, but also from his creation back to God, God gives Adam and Eve human agency. He gives them choice. And they choose to sin. They choose to turn away from God. And what happens, because God is just, is as a result of that, all of creation becomes subjected to futility. All of creation itself becomes a bondage to corruption. We live in a broken world, which is why there's war, which is why there's famine, which is why there's sickness, which is why people cannot get along. But it goes on, it says, and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. It's looking ahead towards Jesus. That's what it's talking about. It says, for we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. My wife's given birth to 4 different kids. I was in the room, all 4, and it was a painful experience. Not for me. I was good. I was very chill, very relaxed. But it looked really painful for her. And so the writer, Paul, the writer of Romans, is using that as this description that we can hold on to. And he's saying that all of creation has been groaning this pain because of this fallen world. In Romania in 1989, there was a totalitarian dictator. His name was Nicolae Ceausescu. Nicolae Ceausescu became the dictator of Romania in 1965. He was the dictator from 1965 until 1989. Now, at first, everything kind of went okay, but then he started taking more and more and more power. He had a secret police that anybody who spoke out against him as dictator, the secret police would go arrest those people, and then they would just simply disappear. There was strong government surveillance. Government owned the media. It owned all communication. And so you really could not speak out against the government. In addition to that, in 1982, the government made some investments into foreign countries' oil and gas, and all of those investments went bankrupt. So all of a sudden, Romania had massive debt, and they weren't sure what to do, so they took their primary resource, which was agriculture, and they started outsourcing it. They took everything that they were producing, and instead of having it for their country, they were sending it to other countries. So from 1982 until 1989, massive famine spreads across the country. You had terrible health, terrible sickness, children dying, adults dying. Then in 1989, one reporter described the only food that was available to Romanians was cabbage, canned sardines, and some potatoes. There's no meat, there's no fruits, there's hardly any vegetables. And so in early December of 1989, a Hungarian pastor gets up in front of his congregation and he starts calling out the dictator, saying, how could our dictator, who lived in a palace, who had food flown from all over the world, had a full belly, healthy, how could he live in the palace and eat what he eats while the rest of us suffer and die? And so the secret police come to arrest the pastor, except the crowd wouldn't let him. The crowd then turns into a giant group that goes and starts marching towards the Capitol. The military comes in, opens fire on the protesters. That caused a flame that now all of a sudden protests started all across the country, and they protested on the palace of the dictator. And from outside the palace, they started to cry out, "You don't understand from in there what it's like out here." And then on Christmas Day in 1989, the dictator and his wife would be killed. The government was overthrown, and there was a complete regime change. The people were sick and starving and dying, and they cried out, "You just couldn't understand. You're not one of us." The Christmas story is that God looked down on his creation and he said, "I will become one of you." And so Jesus enters into creation. But he doesn't enter in as a king in a palace with a luxurious life. No, he enters in, and from day one, Jesus endures suffering. He's born to a peasant parents outside of wedlock. He's born in a poor town. He runs from people trying to kill him and pursue him. He becomes a carpenter's son, a manual laborer. That's what a carpenter was at that time. That he lives a poor life. He never sins. And then he willingly chooses to die on the cross for your sins and my sins. Look at what it says in Isaiah chapter 53. Describing Jesus, it says, "Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God and afflicted, but he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us," there's our word, "peace. And with his wounds we are healed." You see, Jesus wants to offer us peace. But we have to understand the kind of peace that he's offering. He's not saying, "Hey, if you follow after me, that everything's gonna be perfect and everything's gonna be happy and you're never gonna have any challenge in this life." No, he's saying that I want to offer you wholeness, completeness. In Ecclesiastes, the author says that we are created with eternity in our soul. That means that there's a longing that can never be filled in this earth. And Jesus steps down and says, "This is a peace that I offer, that you can have right standing relationship with God, wholeness with God." He doesn't say that in having wholeness with God, that you will always be happy on this earth. No, he's saying that I'm looking ahead to an eternal peace, that you will forever be his. See, Mary the mother of Jesus, she didn't always have happiness. She had a lot of struggle in her life. And yet, here's what she did have. She had peace, meaning that even with those dark and challenging times, she could overcome because of her relationship with Jesus. In Ephesians chapter 2, verse 14, it says, "For he himself," talking about Jesus, "is our peace." Jesus doesn't just offer peace. No. He says, "I am that peace." And here's the encouragement I would give for you at Christmas. Maybe you're walking in here today and it's a dark season, a challenging season. Maybe you're not happy. Maybe it's not a perfect Christmas. Maybe you'd say, "I don't have earthly peace," but the truth of the gospel, what he offers, the message of Christmas, is that Jesus is that peace you've been looking for. And with outstretched arms, he gives the invitation, come. Tim Keller was a brilliant intellectual and pastor who passed away earlier this year. But my favorite thing that he ever wrote was this. He says, "We are more sinful and flawed in ourselves than we ever dared believe. Yet, at the very same time, we are more loved and accepted in Jesus Christ than we ever dared hope." That's the story of Christmas. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. I want to pause for a moment and give you this encouragement that if you're here in this room and you've never experienced the peace that Jesus offers, we have a place in the back left of our room we call Trailhead. A trailhead, when you go on a hike, is that place where you meet up to start. And so if you are interested in learning more about having a relationship with Jesus, starting a journey with him, then as soon as we are done, I would just encourage you to make your way back to Trailhead. Say, I want to learn more about Jesus. Maybe you're here and you just need prayer. Maybe you're here and you're carrying burdens. You are a believer, you are a Christian, but you'd say, this is a lonely and dark and challenging Christmas. And Jesus would say that he wants to be that peace in the midst of that brokenness. So if you need prayer for any reason, as soon as we're done, make your way back to Trailhead. We'd love to pray for you there. Maybe you're here and you're just a brand new person of the church. And you'd say, going into 2024, we want to be all in. We want to learn what the church has for our family or for me as an individual. If you're new and you'd like to get connected, as soon as we're done, make your way back to Trailhead. We'd love to give you a gift. I want to end our time by showing you two different pictures. This is a picture of my neighbor that is across the street. This picture was taken in February of this year, February of 2023. Now, moments later, I took this next picture, and that is a picture of my house on the same day, at the same time as our neighbor. Because my house faces northwest, which means that in the winter, we have a frozen tundra from about now until April. That's about how long it lasts. The snow that we just got today, we will have that 3 months from now because that's how our yard works. In addition to the fact that we face northwest, our neighbors to our left and our right have giant trees. And so if there was any sun that might make it onto our yard, not because of those trees. I'll be honest, during the tornado at Highlands Ranch, I had a strong temptation to just go and, hey, tornado, I don't know, it fell over. It's a shame. I didn't do that because I'm a pastor. Also because you'd be a terrible person to do that. But I thought it. What's the difference between my house and my neighbor's house? Sunlight. You see, light casts out the darkness. Light penetrates even the coldest and the darkest heart. One of the most beautiful traditions that Christians have at Christmas Eve, is the lighting of candles. Christmas is around the winter solstice. December 21st is the darkest day of the year, which means that every day going forward until June 21st will be a little bit brighter and a little bit brighter. And the hope of the gospel is this, that even in a room as dark as this one, that one light makes a difference. And that if we would have a relationship with Jesus, that every day becomes a little brighter and a little brighter.